It began with a photograph. Faded, curled at the edges, black and white, two young boys standing barefoot in the dust, arms stiff at their sides, mouths slack, eyes wrong. One looked slightly behind the camera, the other didn't seem to be looking at anything at all. Their faces matched, but not cleanly. There was something lopsided about them, something you couldn't quite name. People used to say they were born with the same soul split into uneven halves, but those who knew them better, the ones who lived in that part of Appalachia, whispered a different kind of story, one soaked in old blood and older guilt. The twins were raised by their grandfather, a man who hadn't spoken to another adult in over 20 years. His cabin sat deep in a hollow outside Hyden, Kentucky, almost unreachable by road. Locals say the land around it still feels heavy, like the trees are listening. That man, they said, was more shadow than flesh. No birth records, no marriage license, no name in the county books after 1921. But he had those boys, and he kept them from the world like two secrets he never meant to tell. What happened in that cabin from 1938 to 1954 has never been documented. No newspaper touched it, no police files survived. Just rumors, recovered letters, and one caseworker's report that disappeared from the state archives in 1973. But in those fragments, in those unsent letters found under a floorboard during a flood, something emerged. A shape, a pattern, a bloodline that bent too far inward. A grandfather raising not his grandsons, but his sons. If you're still here, you're already staring too deep. But that's what you came for, isn't it? A look into the family no one wanted to remember, and the twins who weren't supposed to survive. They were known only as the boys, even well into their teens. No birth certificates, no school enrollment, no mention in church rosters, just whispered sightings. Two pale figures seen on the edge of the tree line at dusk, standing motionless while their grandfather collected mail once every 2 weeks. One witness, a traveling merchant who sold tools up in Leslie County, claimed he saw them in 1949. Said they stared at him from the porch like they'd never seen a stranger before. He described their faces as mirror images carved wrong, sloped foreheads, narrow slanted eyes. One walked with a limp that didn't match any visible injury. The other blinked too slowly, like it took effort. But it wasn't just the way they looked, it was the stillness. He said they didn't fidget, didn't speak, didn't smile, just stared, as if something inside had already turned to stone. It was the merchant who brought the first outsider's suspicion. After that visit, he wrote a letter to the county welfare office. Not because of cruelty, he saw no bruises, no chains, but because, in his words, no child should look that empty. But the letter went unanswered. Hyden was full of forgotten people by then. Mining towns collapsing, families leaving, roads washing out. A call from a dirt-poor holler about strange twins didn't even make the bottom of the pile. What no one knew was what the merchant didn't see. The boys never left the house except when forced. The grandfather fed them in silence, sitting across the table with a rifle leaned against the wall. He spoke in old phrases, words they'd never heard from anyone else, called them my repeats, told them they were chosen. He never let them look in mirrors, covered everyone in burlap. He told them their faces weren't theirs, that they came from a time before names. And the boys believed him. They had nothing else to believe in. No Dios, other, no birth, just the cabin, just the man, and each other. But even in silence, something always leaks out. One of the boys began writing, scraps mostly, bits of thoughts carved with a nail into the underside of the bed. He says I was born too late. My brother cries without sound. We share the same night. It wasn't until 1953 that someone finally crossed the boundary. Her name was Evelyn Cross. A young woman from Louisville sent as part of a failing outreach program meant to document and assist Appalachian families living in extreme isolation. She was 24, idealistic, and far too trusting. County records show she hiked nearly 5 miles alone into the hollow after her driver refused to go further down the washed-out road. Evelyn didn't leave a lot behind, just her journal, recovered years later in an estate sale in Harlan, and a handful of photographs. The pictures are haunting, grainy and unfocused but unmistakable. 2 boys sitting on the porch of a rotting cabin, their clothes several sizes too large, their hands clenched together. In the next frame, the grandfather appears, face obscured by motion blur, his outline rigid, one arm raised like he's about to speak or strike. The final photo is of the ground, snapped by accident, likely during her abrupt departure. Evelyn's notes are calm at first, descriptions of the landscape, the poverty, the eeriness of the hollow. But by the second day, her tone shifts. She writes, "There's something wrong with the boys. They speak in fragments, unfinished sentences. They won't let go of each other's hands. When I asked if they had a mother, they both pointed to the same tree. She tried to report what she saw, but the local office dismissed her. No one wanted to stir up another scandal in the hills. They told her to drop it, to move on, to focus on families that could still be helped." But Evelyn returned, twice, and on her final visit, she stayed the night. Her last journal entry reads, "There is something in the way they breathe. It's like watching lungs that never learned how." She never returned to Louisville. Her body wasn't found. The case was quietly closed as a presumed accident. But there's one tale no one could explain. Her journal was wrapped in fabric from one of the twins' shirts. It smelled of earth and something faintly metallic. Blood, maybe, or iron. The sheriff's deputy who filed the evidence resigned the same week. He told his wife, they weren't raised by him, they were forged by him. What happened in that cabin between 1953 and 1954 has become the marrow of local myth, a mixture of memory, fear, and whatever truth still clings to rotting wood. There's a story passed down through 3 generations of the Langford family, who lived closest to the edge of the hollow. One morning in the spring of '54, the youngest son, Caleb, now in his 80s, says he saw smoke rising from the trees where the old man's cabin should have been. Not thick, not like fire, just a slow, curling haze that hung in the sky like it didn't want to leave. He rode his mule halfway up the hill, then stopped. The air smelled strange, like wet copper and mold. He says he heard a sound he never forgot. Not a scream, not quite, something more hollow, like grief trying to find a mouth. That same week, the county clerk received an anonymous package. Inside, a single sheet of paper, hand-typed, no return address, no signature, just 14 words. The blood went in circles. The twins were never meant to see the sun. They searched the area 2 weeks later. A federal team, mostly unfamiliar with the landscape, guided by incomplete maps and shaky reports. The cabin had been burned, not from the outside, but from the inside out, like it imploded. No bodies were found, just fragments, a jawbone, a child's shoe, several teeth, all from the same mouth. But 2 small impressions in the ash puzzled the team. 2 sets of footprints, bare, walking side by side toward the creek bed, and vanishing into the mud. The grandfather was never seen again. The twins were never found. But stories continued. In 1956, a hunter claimed he saw them by moonlight, standing in the shallows of a creek, arms linked, faces turned toward the water. When he shouted, they vanished. In '62, a retired teacher passing through said she met 2 silent boys hitchhiking near Pikeville, their skin pale as poppy, their eyes never blinking. She offered them a ride. One whispered, "We're going back." Each of these stories ended the same way. No proof, no names, just a memory too strange to retell without trembling. By the time the 1970s arrived, the twins had become folklore. Parents warned their children not to wander too deep into the woods after dusk, lest the Mirror Boys find them. Campfire tales spread through eastern Kentucky like ash on wind. Stories of children hearing whispers in the trees, of 2 identical figures staring through cabin windows, unmoving, even when spotted. Some thought they were ghosts. Others believed they were something worse. Not dead, not living, just left behind. But not everyone dismissed the past as myth. One man didn't. Dr. Marshall Greaves was a retired psychiatrist from Ohio who moved to the area in 1971 for quiet. Or so he said. In truth, he'd come because of Evelyn Cross. She had been his student once, and her disappearance haunted him. He believed the stories, or at least enough of them to start digging. He rented a small home outside Hyden and spent years collecting anything tied to the twins. Interviews, hospital records, police reports, handwritten testimonies from elderly neighbors. What he found disturbed him, not because it proved what happened, but because so much of it had been deliberately erased. Greaves noted something few others had seen. There were missing family records in the county's birth registries, entire branches of one bloodline that seemed to vanish after 1912. And when he followed those names backward, they all traced to a single family, the Merriweathers. One branch had migrated into the mountains after a scandal involving inappropriate relations between siblings. By 1920, no male heirs remained. On paper, they'd vanished. But Greaves believed otherwise. He claimed that the twins were not just inbred, but the product of several generations of closed-loop reproduction, each generation folding inward like paper, a genetic spiral into deformity, silence, and possible psychosis. The grandfather, Greaves B. Lived, was not a guardian. He was an architect, the final bricklayer in a structure made of flesh and madness. Before he could publish his findings, Greaves disappeared. His trailer was found empty, the door wide open. On the kitchen table, all his files stacked neatly and one photograph left on top. A photo of two boys standing in a shallow creek, arms locked, heads tilted toward the camera, eyes that didn't reflect light. There's a strange weight to silence, the kind that collects over years, compounding until it feels like pressure in the soil. That's what remains of the twin story now. Not evidence, not memory, just weight. In 1992, a new road construction project outside Hyden required excavation deep into the hills. Workers unearthed what they thought were animal bones. When the state anthropologist arrived, he determined they belonged to at least 3 human children, none older than 10. Skulls misshapen, teeth in irregular patterns, some fused at the jaw. No matching missing persons reports, no cause of death, no graves nearby, just buried together, as if the earth itself had tried to smother the memory. One forensic assistant, who later quit the field entirely, described the skulls as too similar to be coincidence, too wrong to be twins. She noted an anomaly, a shallow carving on one of the jawbones, a faint symbol resembling an infinity loop, etched post-mortem with something sharp. The file was closed as indeterminate historical remains, but the local community knew better. They didn't say it, not aloud, but you could see it in their eyes. The Langfords moved away that year, so did the Barlows, families who'd lived there for generations. When asked why, most just said, "It's time to go." But stories never die. They rot. They warp. In 2007, hikers found a crude wooden cross half buried near the creek where the twins were last seen. Tied to it with rusted wire, a children's pair of shoes, perfectly preserved, the kind worn in the 1950s. Beneath them, scrawled into the wood, same blood, same soul, same end. No one claimed responsibility. A private investigator, hired by a true crime podcast in 2013, traced the story of the twins through whispered interviews and unlisted death certificates. His conclusion was simple and terrifying. The family hadn't ended. It had simply gone deeper, off the grid, into the hollows, where names are traded like rumors and the past isn't dead, just breathing under floorboards. Maybe the twins never died. Maybe they weren't even twins in the way we understand. Maybe they were the last visible part of something older, a lineage hidden in plain sight, folded in on itself so many times that it created something unrecognizable. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? The last known sighting was in 2019. A government drone surveying for fire risks over a remote portion of the Kentucky wilderness captured a 15-second video. The footage was dismissed by officials as inconclusive wildlife imagery, but a technician, who leaked the clip before being fired, insisted it showed something else. 2 figures, thin, barefoot, moving slowly through the underbrush with unnatural synchronicity, their heads tilted the same way, their arms swinging in unison. Even in low-resolution grayscale, there was something deeply wrong about their movement, too precise, too mirrored, as if they weren't walking but performing. No follow-up search was ever conducted. The footage vanished from public record 2 weeks later. But that technician didn't stop looking. In an anonymous forum post just before he disappeared, he wrote, "It's not that they survived, it's that someone wanted them to." He claimed he found evidence of mail routed through rural post offices under the Merriweather name, all sent from different addresses, none traceable to real homes, all within a 40-mile radius of that cabin's remains. And then, silence. We are left with fragments, scraps of bone, photographs with hollow stares, Burned journals, second-hand stories passed like infection through Appalachian bloodlines. But no final answer, no grave, no confirmed death, just the impression, heavy, persistent, that something was born in that hollow and never left. A grandfather whose records don't exist, a pair of boys who may never have been boys at all, a family tree with no branches, just a loop twisted into flesh and fed across generations like a sickness. They say the past dies if you don't speak of it, but not this one. This story clings, like smoke in old wood, like fingerprints beneath peeling wallpaper. The more you try to forget it, the deeper it settles. And maybe that's the real horror. Not what happened, but how easy it is for the earth to hide it. Somewhere out there, in the quietest folds of America, there are still places where the blood runs in circles, and no one comes looking. You've just heard one of them, and now you know what you weren't supposed to.